So when the Great Depression hit, it didn't just take people's jobs, it took their homes. Suddenly, millions of people had nowhere to go. And in the face of this, absolute crisis, they did something truly remarkable. They built their own cities, literally from scratch. All right, let's dive into this incredible story. Just take a look at this image. This was the reality for so many people back in the 1930s. When the system completely failed them, they took whatever they could find, scrap wood, tin, cardboard, you name it, and they built shelter. And we're not talking about just a few isolated shacks here and there. No, these were entire communities. These settlements became so common that they actually got their own name, Hoovervilles. You could find them on the edges of pretty much every major city, standing as this stark, very physical reminder of the economic collapse. And that name, well, that name itself was a protest. It was a pretty sharp political jab, right? By calling them Hoovervilles, people were pointing the finger squarely at President Herbert Hoover. They were holding him and his administration responsible for all this misery. It was a powerful, bitter, and a very political statement. Okay, so while there were literally hundreds of these encampments all across the country, we're going to zoom in on one in particular. One of the biggest and one of the longest lasting was in Seattle. It was basically a city within a city, and its story is absolutely fascinating. So where exactly was it? Well, you can see here it was kind of on prime real estate in a weird way. It took up 9 whole acres of public land owned by the Port of Seattle, right there on Elliott Bay. This was land that used to be a major shipyard. And today, it's where giant container ships unload their cargo. And this map really gives you a sense of the scale of the place. We're not talking about a handful of shacks. This is a map from March 1934, and it shows this incredibly dense, sprawling community of hundreds of individual homes, and every single one of them was built by hand. But the city's relationship with this Hooverville was, well, it was complicated. At first, the authorities tried to get rid of it. Police actually burned the encampment to the ground twice, but the residents just rebuilt. The real game changer came in 1932. A new mayor was elected, and he brought in a policy of official tolerance. And that's what allowed this community to survive and even grow for almost 10 years. So what was it really like to live there? Was it just total chaos, or was there something more going on beneath the surface? Well, from the outside looking in, it definitely looked chaotic. There was a survey done in 1934 that described the nearly 500 homes as being scattered over the terrain in insane disorder. You can just picture it, can't you? A total maze of winding paths and little shacks built wherever they could possibly fit. But that's not the whole picture, not even close. You look at this and you see something else entirely. Amidst all that so-called disorder, a vibrant, incredibly resilient community really started to take shape. And we're talking about a big community, too. At its peak, especially during those brutal winter months when work was hardest to find, the population of Seattle's Hooverville swelled to as many as 1,200 people. And what might surprise you is just how diverse this population was. So the majority was white, about 71%, but that means almost a third of the residents were non-white. You had large Filipino and African-American communities, among others. In fact, one observer at the time called it an ethnic rainbow, where men from all different backgrounds mingled in what he called shabby camaraderie. And make no mistake, this was not some ungoverned mob. Far from it. They created their own, surprisingly sophisticated system of self-governance. They had an unofficial mayor, a guy named Jesse Jackson. And even more amazing, they had an elected vigilance committee to keep order. And get this. The committee was made up of 2 white members, 2 black members, and 2 Filipino members, specifically to make sure everyone was represented fairly. And their mayor, Jesse Jackson, he just summed up the whole spirit of the place perfectly. He said, "Hooverville is the abode of the forgotten man." It was a home, a real home, for all the people that society had basically left behind. But of course, this unique social experiment, well, it couldn't last forever. As the world started hurtling towards another massive global conflict, the fate of Hooverville was pretty much sealed. You see, as the United States began gearing up for World War II, that port land that Hooverville was sitting on suddenly became strategically vital. It was needed for shipping facilities for the war effort. And just like that, the city's decade of tolerance, it came to a very abrupt end. So, in April 1941, the residents were evicted. The police moved in and they burned the shacks to the ground. This picture right here is incredibly powerful. It's actually from the destruction of the Hooverville in nearby Tacoma, but it shows you the common fiery end that so many of these communities faced. And just like that, a decade of history was gone. This timeline really puts it into stark perspective, doesn't it? It was established in 1931, and in 1941 it was razed for the war effort. 10 years. This self-made city existed, and then it was just erased. So, what are we supposed to take away from all this? What's the lasting legacy of these cities that were literally built from scrap? Let's unpack that a bit. Well, first, it's so important to remember that Seattle's story, as incredible as it is, was not unique. There were hundreds of these Hoovervilles all across the country, each with its own story, its own people, and even its own colorful nicknames, like the one in Tacoma, which they called Hollywood on the Tide Flats. Which really just leaves us with this final question to think about. What does this story of these self-governing cities built from scrap by people who were called forgotten, what does it teach us? When pushed to the absolute edge, they didn't just survive, they organized, they governed themselves, and they built real communities. It really makes you think about community and resilience and what we're all capable of when things get tough.